The WM Design Challenge, we teamed up with WM to bring 6 designers in the US and the UK together. They each received a grant to explore how they can use waste as part of their design process. So not looking as waste as this linear thing at the very end of the process, but more in, a circular design and how that works in a framework. So they used everything from tents to biochar to Amazon packaging to rice bags to fiber waste, excuse me, to fiber waste to systems design. It's a lot of amazing things and a little blend of each to bring together the WM Design Challenge. All right, so what is waste-led design? So waste-led design was a term that is coined by our Chief Innovation Officer, Colin, that explains waste-led design as a practice that challenges us to see a product's end of life as a consideration equal to functionality, material, print, and pattern. And by doing this, waste becomes a part of the production system rather than an afterthought, which minimizes the amount of debris that winds up in a landfill. So this comes from our program, Landfills as Museums. So this is the first project that we did with WM. We actually visited a landfill to, because sometimes waste seems like this far away, distant thing. We throw something away and then it kind of leaves our mind. So this is an educational initiative that brought us to the landfill to see, where does everything go? What happens to it? And can this be a site of storytelling? We actually have a class. If you guys have been with Flow Factory and Open EDU for a while, we have a class called Waste-Led Design, which is taught by our founder, Celine Seman. I'm sure one of the team members can drop that in the chat. It's a really great class that lays a foundational framework for what this design challenge is, what Landfills as Museums was, what the concept of waste-led design is that Slow Factory has adopted into everything that we've done. So in 2018, 146.1 million tons of MSW, which is municipal solid waste, were landfilled. Food was the largest component at about 24%. Plastics accounted for over 18%, and rubber, leather, and textiles comprised over 11%. So 14.7% of textiles are recycled and the rest ends up in landfills. And to put that in perspective, 1 ton is 2,000 pounds, which is 907-ish kilos for our, everybody outside of the US, basically. And just to even touch on food, 24% is 35 million tons. So that is per year of waste that we are sending to landfills that, are just kind of discarded. And obviously, if you add all this up, it's not quite 100%, but these are the, main materials that our designers are working with, and also some of the main things that are ending up in landfills, which is what makes me so excited about this project. So this waste ends up lasting in decomposing in landfills from anywhere between 6 months to 1 million years, which I can't even wrap my mind around. So food waste up to 2 years, plastic bags up to 100 years, leather shoes a minimum of 25 years, and glass up to 1 million years. So these are materials that we just use so whimsically, and they end up lasting lifetimes and generations. So what does it look like if we use these very ingredients? Please, you're not making a cake. We're talking about waste, so to speak. So, what happens if we use, these things that end up decomposing for well beyond our lifetimes within our design process? What does that look like when we begin to look at waste not as this garbage excess, but as a design asset? And that's where this WM Design Challenge was born from. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our designers. They're have so much to share with you. We're going to start off with Gordon and then Delfina, and then we'll jump into Sayo talking about unexpected materials and Mary and Charlotte, and Natasha, Bob from the Bob and Robert team, but Robert's not here. Miss you, Robert, and Raul and Tia, who are joining Bob to explain their processes. So one quick note, also, we save time, of course, for Q&A at the end, but since we have so many designers, if you guys wouldn't mind when you're sending in your questions, kind of specify who it's going for. So, question for Sayo, and send it in our way, because that'll help me moderate at the end. It will be so helpful for me. So without further ado, Gordon, I'm gonna pass it to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gordon Holliday. I am one of the designers for the Waste Management Design Challenge. And my focus in as far as waste-led design is in upcycling. So a lot of the times people will donate me clothing, or I may have leftover materials from other projects, or I might even be partnered up with a company such as Upcycle Arts or Goodwill here in North Carolina. And I'll be able to get like those materials, and I use those in my project. In this project, I was fortunate enough to work with Fab Scrap, and they were able to give us some donations for this project. So coming to you live from Charlotte, North Carolina, without further ado, this is my collection. So here we have all 10 of my pieces. I really wanted to focus on a story that I discovered about the first African samurai named Yasuke. Many people may be familiar with it from maybe the anime, but I also heard this story previously before in a few documentaries. And when I found out about this story, it just made me want to just make all my creative juices just started flowing. Like, wow, what was the time like back then? What was the environment for, someone that was an African warrior in a Japanese environment? What was that? What were those feelings? What were those colors like? And it really started bringing in all this level of inspiration. So what I ended up doing during my research, I ended up finding a very interesting Japanese quilting style called sashiko and buro. Sashiko means like little stabs, and buro essentially means like patches or patchwork. So although this isn't traditional sashiko and buro, that was really the basis of my inspiration for it. And that's when I started beginning my patchwork and using upcycling in a sustainable way. So you'll see here, this talks about my inspiration, and finally asking myself before I even start this collection, what would Yasuke wear on a modern day-to-day life? So this is my 10-piece collection. All of them have their own different colors. All of them have their own, represent an element. All of them have like their own story. And yeah. So these slides kind of just show my behind the scenes process for everything. It would really begin with the idea, with the initial sketch. Sometimes I would just get a feel from the fabric and have the fabric speak to me personally. And I would just document that process. So in the first slide, I just have like the materials that I use, and some of the materials that were donated from like white woven fabric, denim, red linen fabric. A lot of the times I used upholstery fabrics for the collection. So a company that's here in Charlotte pretty much takes leftover materials and give them out for free in their upholstery business. So I was collecting yards of fabric from there. Then I would like to, color coordinate everything. So I would look at like the blues and I'm like, okay, how can I offset that with another color? And in this example, I used red, but I really wanted to stay true to Japanese indigo dyeing. I'm really a big fan of like the indigo denim out there, and just so many different brands like Capitalism, and Ibisu, just so many different really cool Japanese denim brands. I wanted to find a way to just really encapsulate that in this first kimono. So you'll see I broke it down, and one of my mentors as well, Nicole McLaughlin and Jessica with Fab Scrap, they really helped me think about logistics. So they said, okay, you're getting all this material, but you have a way of documenting or having some type of logistics in your process so that people can see almost more of a level of transparency, and that people can see that you're actually breaking this material down and it's being used for a piece. So in here in this part, it says, I took 2 pairs of donated denim jeans, a half a yard of red woven fabric, and then I just broke down the rest, even down to scrap materials and how much that weighed, and all that was put together for this piece. Then I go through the construction process, the patchworking, the pattern cutting, pattern sewing, and then lastly, the embroidery techniques that I use in the pieces. And then you'll see in these next 2 slides, front and back views of the pieces. And then lastly, the final part, which would be the full ensemble. So here in this video, I pretty much show that, even in sustainability, it's not just focused on just the clothing, but also the community aspect, educating, bringing people apart and all together into one. So I like to work with like a lot of local artists that I feel like best represents just like what our structurally like community that we're really trying to do and work towards here. So here is a little video of a time lapse of shooting the entire collection. It was all shot just this last 2 weeks. So this is just a time lapse, and I like to get really just different photographers together. I have my friends Jump Cut, First Kind, and Brianna really came together. My stylist, videographer Michael, and my graphic designer Fart that I worked with. He's a really talented guy. He also did the editorial for the final lookbook for it. But the main part I really want to focus is the community aspect, because not only am I designing clothes, but it's also going back out there into the world. So I'm also very mindful about creating pieces that are timeless, pieces that are classic, and I want people to cherish those and always hold on to them instead of just discarding them, or it ends up back in landfill. We have fast fashion brands where it's like you buy something and then you only wear it for like 2 months or so. And after that, it ends up either in a thrift store, but 90% of the time, it'll probably end up in a landfill. So with these pieces, it's really focused on like, okay, I want to cherish this. I don't ever want to get rid of this. And I even want to pass it down to a family member. So that's kind of like something I would love for everybody to walk away with, when it comes to making clothes, thinking about something that people won't discard, people will hold on to, and adding that as a layer into a regenerative system. And that's the end of my waste-led design.
Hello, everyone. My name is Delfina. I'm a fashion design student at the Fashion Institute of Technology. I'm in my 3rd year. I'm from Argentina originally, and my focus was, I'm not sure if I can pass the slides. All right, great. So my focus for this project was on modular design. Modular design is essentially a concept or a process in which one designs one unit and in such way that it can be replicated and assembled with other ones. So essentially, you can think of modular design as creating one Lego, and then many of those Legos stacked together would be a modular system. These 2 garments here are my final garments for this project, and they are 2 different examples of how modular design can be applied to fashion specifically. Both garments can be interchanged. The different puff squares can be changed to create new garments. The same goes with the shirt. Now, in terms of modular design and how it relates to waste-led design, the modular design can help in two specific stages of the life cycle of a garment. The first one, the usage stage, mostly because we are losing with time. We have lost the value and the connection with our garments, and also our garments are not necessarily able to adapt to our different needs throughout time. And what modular design helps with is basically if your body changes or the weather changes or one part of your garment is stained, then you can change that garment in such way that you can keep using the clothes. So in a way, it's extending the life cycle. And then when it comes to the repurposing stage, what modular design helps with is basically just to separate different types of fibers and different types of materials. This jacket, for instance, cannot necessarily be recycled, but it could be maybe quilted with just scraps of fabric that just in a way can continue the life cycle of those little pieces that may not necessarily be able to even work with in patchwork design. And then so it depends on what type of material the modular design can be effective and can provide different lives to a garment. But that's what basically my project is about. For my application for this project, I made a garment out of denim scraps that were what I used to quilt those squares basically that can be put together. And then finally, if you pass to the next slide, please. I created a guide, an online guide that anyone can access to right now, just providing a baseline of literature for what modular design is and just the different categories. There are different attachments that can help or not help the garment be more easily discarded at the end of the life cycle. And then also a checklist for designers to kind of check if they want to apply modular design, what questions should they be asking themselves to check whether modular design is, their designs are effective or not. But that was pretty much my project. And if there is one thing that modular design I think is about, is just making the garment adapt to the user and the environment and not the other way around. Of course, there are different ways where even modular design can deter the environment and not help it. But I think if it's done with the right materials, this jacket was made thanks to fab scrap with pre-consumer waste, and then this shirt was made with post-consumer waste. And there are very different ways to apply modular design in order to help just kind of dig through waste and utilize it as a resource. And thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Sayo from Needs Theory. If we move on to the next slide. At Needs Theory, we create fashion goods and services as packaging waste solutions. And I kind of walked into this challenge thinking that I want to create some products with a standardized system for the material collection, and then have that translate to specific products that I can repurpose or recreate. But in the beginning, because I couldn't find my waste, sources, I ended up beginning with creating random things. The bag on the left was created out of this meat tray and this handle from a toy, these hanger parts for the feet and like woven polycords from packaging cardboard boxes and like some other toy parts and sewing that together by hand. And then I really wanted to use soft plastics at one point. So I moved on to this like metallic bubble mailer from food deliveries. And yeah, I tried to use that and made this bag in the center. And then because I still didn't have my materials, I was exploring with like any packaging waste that I can find or that I personally collected. So this heart-shaped little purse was made out of these, what is this? My mom was getting like a monthly lingerie subscription in these cute little heart containers. And when I went to Japan, my grandma like kept all of them from like years and years ago. And so I brought them back home and decided to make this little pouch with like a zippered back. And if we move on to the next slide, initially I was looking for mailers and soft plastics that are hard to recycle from family and friends. But at one point I wanted like a source that could give me more than just a couple bags at a time. So I reached out on Instagram and kind of like posted this listing for my need for mailers, and Vivian from Ground Cycle ended up reaching out to me. They deliver fresh produce and pick up compost while also picking up people's like soft plastics so that they can be repurposed through people like me or any bag. Yeah, and I had a really good time. Like this is the video on the left is us getting together in front of Vinegar Hill Community Garden in New York to just present what these members' plastic waste turned out to become, with some of my hats and like bags in the back. And these bags on the right are some of the bags that I ended up creating. If we move on to the next page, I have my final outcomes from this. So I ended up being able to collect so many materials from Ground Cycle. Thank you to them. And I had these rice bags that I was already working with that my best friend collected for me while working at a Japanese restaurant, because of all the rice that comes in and out. They had all these rice bags that I got to work with. And I basically just created a pair of a bag and a hat for each material, from bubble mailers from food deliveries to rice bags from this Japanese restaurant to these prime mailers from Ground Cycle. And I'd love to give a shout out to Akela, my mentor, who guided me through all of this and helped me process all of this, and everyone else that was involved in collecting the materials to like ideating and just talking about it. Yeah, thank you so much. I had a really good time doing this.
Hi, so I'm Charlotte.
I'm Mary,
and we
invisible.
we are Doppelganger Studio, and our product or our project was Wasty Pasty. A little bit of background: we are both second-year Masters of Industrial Design students here at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. So we sort of took the project from an approach of an industrial designer and also as bio designers with our experience in bioplastics.
Yeah, and we wanted to create a product that with a form that we have like a personal connection to, and that isn't too serious. When we look at waste, sometimes things can feel really heavy and overwhelming. So for form inspiration, we really were thinking about just like famous nudes and female artists that we feel an affinity towards and we connect to as artists ourselves. So we were looking at artists and symbolism that have been used in the depiction of female figures in art history.
And we ultimately came up with Wasty Pasty, which is a series of fun and playful nipple pasties and adhesive bras. and that ultimately biodegrade by all 6 world standards, sequester carbon, repurpose food waste, and actually fertilize soils as they deteriorate. And so how this is possible is with the help of an ancient material called biochar and our bioplastic recipe, which we will explain and get into a little bit further.
All right, so let's start with the problem. That's usually how our design process works. So we were looking at food waste, which, as was already mentioned, is a major part of landfill waste right now. Something that most people don't think about, we didn't initially think about when we think about food waste, is that technically it's biodegradable, right? You can throw food in the ground and over time it will degrade. But unfortunately in landfill conditions, the process of degradation is delayed and it leads to an excess amount of methane that's produced. So in landfill conditions, we're actually creating more greenhouse gases by sending our food waste there. So Charlotte and I asked the question of, what if this food waste could actually be a resource and allow us to fuel a new kind of production? So what we did was take this food waste, we collected our own food waste as well as food scraps from local restaurants. And through a process called pyrolysis, we turned what was once this impactful waste into a product that actually sequesters carbon. And what's more, we were able to have these really valuable conversations with people from Slow Factory and from WM to think about other processes connected to waste management that could support something like this. And what's interesting is that methane, which is produced at landfills, can actually be used through anaerobic digestion as a source of energy. So a process like this could sequester carbon and use green energy all enclosed within one system to create products for people with boobs. And then looking at the bra itself, we putting on our industrial design hats, we started with user research and conversations and hearing stories from people who wear bras. And one problem that they identified was fit, comfort, and longevity. So we adjusted our material to be a version of silicone that's biodegradable. So it's similar in feel, which you could all touch it, to silicone, but the longevity of the material aligns with the product lifespan.
Yeah, and we were just drawn also to pasties again, just to explore this idea of disposability and thinking about whether disposability can be something that we don't have to feel guilty or shameful about when the product lifespan is aligned with the application. For the next slide, we can sort of outline this general life cycle, and it's something that we're still working on and sort of figuring out. But in this first stage, you see the little fork and utensil icon, that's the starting point. And that's when food is eaten and it's consumed or disposed of and wasted. So there are over 75 billion pounds of food that's wasted in the US alone each year. And like we mentioned, 24% of municipal solid waste is in fact food. And as Mary mentioned, when it decomposes in the landfill, it releases methane, which is super toxic. So for the next step, we want to divert this food waste. When it's diverted from the landfill, as Mary mentioned, it undergoes this process of pyrolysis in an anaerobic batch reactor. Basically, this just means that it's heated in an environment that's low oxygen. And in that process, carbon is sequestered in the ultimate material, which is called biochar. We then take the biochar and pulverize it and add it to our bioplastic recipe, which is fully biodegradable and gelatin based. And we make a sort of liquid that we are pouring then to form into the form of the pasties. So it's also an additive process. It's not a subtractive manufacturing process. And then hopefully wasty pasties are worn and loved. We're currently adhering them to the body with body glue, and that just kind of wipes off with water, but we're working with some of our mentors to explore different adhesives that would still align with the ultimate biodegradable goal of the product. But then when you're done with your wasty pasty, after a few uses, we've worn them multiple times, so they do last more than one use. You can literally like throw them in the garden, and that's not like a greenwashing thing. They will biodegrade and actually fertilize the soils as they degrade, or if they are sent to the landfill, which happens, they are still sequestering carbon stably.
So that's great. And then as obviously, if they are composted, they're fertilizing new growth for new food, and that cycle sort of starts again.
And one thing we consider, just again, with our background in industrial design, is just making sure that this material is a mono material. And we think that is really exciting too, that we're replacing bras, which are composed of many different parts and synthesized textiles
And clasps
into a single material that can be easily manufactured cheaply and affordably, and then recycled and composted and give the users agency over their own management of that waste.
Yeah, and we just wanted to thank all of our mentors, especially Julie Willoughby and Thean Chiros. Julie for advising us a lot just on the biomaterial space, but then also Thean pushing us to think about the LCA and using like intentional language with how we talk about sustainability and what the product really does. And also to Nicole and the Slow Factory and WM teams. It was a really wonderful experience for us. So thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Natasha, and yeah, that's my Instagram there. So I'm from London, England, and I've just finished in my MA in Fashion Futures, which is thinking about sustainable fashion at the London College of Fashion in London. So my project, was all about kind of community textile waste, because I kind of came to this kind of problem from the perspective of a parent, and my children are always kind of running through clothes because they just get dirty or they get stained or they get torn, and this is the same for the community of parents that I kind of live with. And so we are always basically not knowing what to do with this waste. And prior to kind of working on this project, I was, guilty of throwing my kids' dirty or like paint covered or food stained clothes in the bin, from when they were babies, because I didn't really know what else to do with them. And so that's when I started to think, actually all of this stuff, like there has to be some other thing. So I just stopped kind of throwing them in the bin, and I just ended up having like bin bags full of just these random kind of dirty ripped clothes, and then eventually started working on a project where I started to just cut them up into tiny little pieces, because I'd been making like puffer jackets, and I originally started kind of using that, but they were too chunky. And so with this project I got the opportunity to actually rent an industrial textile shredder, which is great, and that kind of speeded up the whole process. So the purpose was to explore how I could innovatively use the textile waste within my community and work with materials that were, say, destined to go into the bin or the trash, and turn them into something that's like well made, cool and created. And so I started with like the research, as I was saying. I did a few kind of prototypes and testing to try and work out how to kind of solve this problem of waste, especially particularly for kind of low-income families within my community. And then design, the thing with waste-led design as well is that I wasn't really sketching, because I didn't know what it was going to look like, because I was being led by the materials that I had. And then create and experiment and implement these into the outcome, which was a 100% recycled puffer jacket. I also did a bit of research, you can see below. So I interviewed and spoke to 25 different people in my local community, just to kind of see, as a kind of future potential brand, how interested people would be in a kind of buyback system, so where people could take their kids' old dirty stained clothes and they'd be sold for weight, so that people in low incomes could have a kind of generate a new income stream. But it was also kind of going back into fashion and just kind of understanding, whether that would then in turn encourage people to, buy recycled clothes if they knew that, the things that they were donating were going back into them. So next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, Nicole mentioned, and other guys have mentioned, there's a lot of waste. And in England, there's 3.1 kilos of textile waste every year in England, and only 0.3 kilos are recycled and 0.4 reused. And so the aim was to utilize this puffer jacket as a solution and a symbol to highlight these issues within the UK and the general lack of climate and social justice education and privilege, you know, that we're kind of lacking here, which is, I'm sure, the same for all of you guys. And that kind of leading to that inability to make truly sustainable fashion choices when you're going onto the high street. And so how I got to this point with the outer, so I was kind of all set up. I knew what I was going to fill the coat with. That was going to be community waste, shredded textile waste from my community. But the outer I struggled with, and it was actually my mentor, Arja Barber, who suggested using tents, because in the UK, there's so many festivals over the summer, and every year there's just so many abandoned tents. And, you know, lots of charities now are collecting them for homeless people, but still there's just so much that just ends up going to landfill. So to say thank you to Arja for the outer, because it's perfect, you know, it's exactly the right material and it's waterproof. So yeah, so that's how I kind of came up with my materials. And then these images are just the kind of, the final outcome, and it's also behind me. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this competition has been great. As I said, you know, I got the opportunity to hire an industrial shredder, but it also gave me the opportunity to set up a studio, because, you know, I'm 37 and I had never had a studio before. So, you know, this project with Slow Factory and waste management, as I say, it's given me the opportunity to set up a studio, and now, like, I'm in it, it's like I'm never letting it go. And I can, you know, kind of pursue this activity and continue on with making these kind of what I'm going to call waistcoats, and try to, you know, establish a kind of brand based on, you know, making kind of cool puffer jackets out of waste. There's a little video here. I don't know if we can play it just so you can see my process. Okay, maybe I should talk through it, because I did have music. But yeah, so this was the tent that I got, the first tent. I actually had a couple, but I worked with this one because I liked the colours and the little details, which I tried to kind of highlight. And so, yeah, I had to kind of, break this tent down and take out all the pegs. And then, yeah, as I said, I kind of roughly sketched, but I had no idea what it was actually going to look like. And so this is the shredder that I was talking about. I hired this from Germany. And yeah, it was amazing, because I hadn't ever managed to get a material to be that fine before and that fluffy, because I'd just been using like a rotary cutter and scissors. So as you can see, it's like really fluffy. So that's what I was using to fill the coats. And then it was really experimental, just lots of draping to try and get a kind of final, you know, vision of what the coat might look like. So this was the outer, and then underneath is where actually all the filling in. So there's two parts to the coat. There's the inner, which is the puffer, and then an outer, which kind of goes over the top. Yeah, so this is the inner that I was just talking about. So this is kind of hidden underneath the coat. And then, yeah, this is the final product, which I put back in the tent bag, which I thought was kind of cool, a bit cheesy. But yeah, this was the final outcome. And actually this coat, and I've made one a bit in a kind of similar fashion to this before, but I wanted to wait until we had this session today. But what will happen now with this coat is a bit like, you know, Gordon was saying, is about kind of giving it longevity, is that I will pass it around to everybody that donated me clothes that have now gone into the coat, and so that it will just be passed around, you know, within my community, and hopefully looked after. And, you know, if it's ever damaged, then I will just fix it, and if it needs refilling, then I have like tons of shred to fill it with. So yeah, and I just want to again say thank you to Chad and Mara and Arja and Nicole and everybody at Slow Factory for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Bobby Carswell, and unfortunately we don't have Robert Seevers here today. He's actually at the North Carolina State School for Textiles, so he's going to come back and teach us everything we need to know. But I do have two other folks that I'll introduce here in a second. But just to talk about our project, we really wanted to have a sweater design from our circular waste inputs in our community. I'm the research and development director over at Material Return, and what we are is a one-stop shop for circular solutions for manufacturers, textile brands, and also post-consumer waste. But we wanted to actually, just for the history and why we embarked on this design challenge, because in North Carolina, we have a really rich history of textiles. With just in our little 4-county region, we have over 300 textile manufacturers that produce some type of waste. So it was a perfect spot to, it's almost like you were calling it the ingredients for the recipes. This is our kitchen pantry. We have tons of different types of textile waste here. So we embarked on this design challenge because of the history of textiles and also the amazing communities and cultures that helped create this industry. And for our partners, this collaboration, we collaborated with Smart Wool because we launched a second cut project where we started taking back all post-consumer socks in the US and converted those into new yarns, new fibers, and new non-wovens for manufacturing. So we also wanted to be sure that we embarked and told our story. So we had this project design charrette where we introduced the Hmong and Guatemalan communities to this project and had them help design, with all of the proceeds of the sales going to those two communities, to the organizations in their communities of their choice. The waste stream, we wanted to create a story of sustainable textile manufacturing that really nobody's telling about what we're doing in North Carolina as an entire industry. So by creating something new from our textile waste stream in North Carolina and from globally as well. And the next slide, I would like to also introduce Tia Yang, which helped us on our design of these products, several different products.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Tia Yang, and I'm the Values and Culture Manager at the Industrial Commons, and I participated in the Material Return and Smart Wool Design Challenge. So my story is that I am Hmong. We are an ethnic minority that originated in China, and my people have immigrated all over Southeast Asia and then to Western countries as well to escape war and persecution. So along the way, we have lost a lot, but some things like our textile heritage remains a constant throughout our history. Our textiles are our identity and have served as such when our original language was banned under penalty of death. Our colors and prints denote the different clans. Our designs were codes used to create secret messages, and our history captured in our story cloths. It is a source of pride and takes a lifetime of practice to master the intricate needlework. I see our textiles show up in the countless hours my mother spent sewing patterns for traditional outfits for me and each of my 7 siblings. It shows up in the story cloths that both my parents created to sell and barter for food during our time in the refugee camps. Today, it shows up in the creative ways in which our youth is embracing their Hmong identity by adding Hmong prints into their everyday clothing. And I participated in this design challenge by sharing traditional clothes from our clans, such as the intricate overcoats, skirts, and coin lace sashes. Our textiles have not been part of the fast fashion trend on a large scale. And my hope for the future is that our young people embrace it more into their everyday lives, but that they do it through a sustainable model of environmental stewardship. And so now I will pass it on to Raul.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Raul Martinez. I work with Opportunity Threads, a worker-owned, minority-led cut and sew manufacturing company here in Morganton. I'm the clientele customer service manager, currently in the process of becoming a member myself. My work entails work with clients that offer different types of textiles that have uniqueness to their product for their customer bases. Where I saw textiles show up around me are the clothes that my mother wore from church to cultural events. They have a significant meaning to the color and designs that tell story from head to toe. I'm a descendant of an indigenous Mayan group in Guatemala, and through my participation in the Smart Wool Design project, It has allowed me to tell a side of my culture and my family story. The items that I brought into show at the event are very traditional that are worn till this day, a small craftsmanship of a beaded keychain of a national bird, ketal, and a table cover that has many meaningful designs to it. With the textile industry being the largest industry in the world, my hope for a sustainable textile industry for the future is to continue growing awareness to buy textile that uses less water and energy, and go for a textile product that's been through the circularity process of using and reusing, just like how material return is doing by keeping it reused and away from the landfill. Thank you, and back to you, Bob.
Yeah, so I just want to thank Tia and Raul. They've been through us on this entire design process, and I'm excited to show you some of the things. So check over to the next slide if you can. So at material return, we go from the reclamation process back to a yarn and back to a fabric, and we can do all that within 75 miles. But the amazing thing about that is we can create numbers of different products now that we've actually got at least 3 years of research and development on several different types of fiber yarns. So just to talk about our process, we got a really hyper local process with the furthest part of the trip is 75 miles away from our own facility, where we do fiber reclamation to yarn spinning into weaving or knitting process. We actually have knitting in the plant. So we've been working with Robert Seevers. You can kind of see him in that picture on the right over there, to design patterns for these sweater ponchos. We have some scarves coming along, and then the entire line that we have in the future too, because we learn more and more. We're kind of building the ship as we sell it over at material return, because there's no playbook on how to do circular materials at scale right now, and if there is, people are keeping it under their belt. But the circular economy is also a part of the North Carolina, the way we move forward in the industry. And we also have a really great network of cut and sew mills, weaving plants, knitting plants that are all in this huge network with thousands and thousands of years of experience in textile manufacturing. So I would really like to thank the team over at Slow Factory and WM for all the help they have, and then especially from our folks that were our mentors. We couldn't have done it without them, because we're like we said, we're building the ship as we sell it, and just absolutely love what y'all are doing. But I also wanted to thank Tia and Raul, and then all the other members. We had over 50 folks in this first group, with the Guatemalan community and the Hmong community join in to show ideas, sketch designs, do all these things that help them create a circular product that actually was influenced by their community and their traditional textile heritage. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing and just telling us more about these beautiful processes and the inspiration behind everything. Okay. I am struggling to find. Well, I guess one question that I have, and it might be one that could be translated across a couple different designers, is how can we start looking at design and sustainability as an ancestral connection and preservation? I mean, I know when we looked at the work that Material Returns is doing, it's really it's clear for us to see what it's like to preserve a cultural of wearing and bring it to life now. But also one that that was kind of fresh to me, and a different way of looking at it was considering, Sayo, when you said you were using your mom's heart-shaped box, we laughed about it last time because my mom would be like, oh my God, you're telling everybody about my lingerie. But, just using something and connecting it across generations is really a form of preservation. And, what else does that kind of look like for us in the design process?
I don't mind going. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm trying
please.
to think about it. It's a really good question about how to kind of make it, ancestral. And I think for mine, you kind of saying that question where I might not have initially thought about it in terms of kind of ancestry, it was more about kind of like that community connection and that kind of like, in terms of being like parents on this project, it's like, take that saying, it takes a village to raise a child, and so I think for me, yeah, it's about trying to create a system where, even if it's just a small community, like for example, mine and the people that I kind of engage with every day, it's about how we can kind of work together to create our own clothes and to stop kind of purchasing and buying into fast fashion and giving our money to brands that, don't necessarily think about us, because we come from kind of low income backgrounds or women of color or single parents, and it's like we're not the kind of target market for a lot of sustainable fashion. And so that's kind of how I was thinking about it in terms of longevity in that sense, so I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but yeah, just kind of creating our own stuff and just thinking about that, importance of that community like unit, and that, they're what kind of keeps you going throughout life.
Yeah, I loved how everything you collected was from your community. I actually saw this wild statistic about how I think it's 250,000 tents are sent to landfills every year in the UK, which is just wild. Which
No,
is, I
yeah,
wonder, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, it's crazy. And I don't know, I didn't actually, do any research. Or it'd be interesting to see in the comments, whether or not tents being just discarded, after festivals. Because I know in the US, you have a lot of festivals in the summer, like if it's such a big problem there. But in the UK, it is like a massive problem. And, luckily I have a friend and she works at a festival and she's always complaining. And it wasn't until this project that I was like, oh, yes, now now we can connect. And now I need, like, I have a reason for you to like bring me these tents back. So it was perfect. But yeah, it's being able to like, utilize that waste from in your community, obviously it was a successful achievement in this case, and something that I hope to be able to continue. And I am continuing on with this project and experimenting with different types of recycled waste that can be going into it, so that I can create clothes for my community based on what we've obtained within it, kind of thing.
Will you still use the tents? Because it's
yeah.
even sportswear material when you think about it too, or like
I actually just came back from the studio and I started working on another tent from a different tent that I was donated. The bits that are left from this one I'm going to try and patchwork together a jacket, but yeah, I'm working on a new coat now using recycled plastic roof insulation that I was donated. So the tents are definitely like a winner, and I think I'm going to try and like push with that, because I think, as I said, this kind of waistcoat idea, like I really like it. And being able to kind of constantly, it's like an endless resource, and inexpensive as well. So I'm hoping that will mean, because a lot of the trouble is, hand making things, you have to sell them for a lot of money. But I'm hoping that because a lot of the things that I get are free, if I want to make money from it, I don't have to sell them extortionate amounts of money, so that people like me and that I know can't, they can't afford them. They can actually be a bit more like, they're more affordable.
100%. And that also kind of gets me thinking, Gordon, I know that you borrowed inspiration from Yasuke, the African samurai, and how, has that kind of, how has that inspired you? Like what, was the historical and cultural inspiration behind that? And then somebody asked, how did you come up with the R logo design? Is there a backstory to that too?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I guess I'll start first with the R design. That really came in from an inspiration from a sci-fi film in 1990, or sci-fi movie from 1994 called Babylon 5. With my brand though, I'm so inspired by like futuristic concepts and concepts of what the future could be. So that's where the R came from, but it's also short. My brand's called Roulette, so it's short for rule over our lives every day. And it's like a mantra that I came up with when I became an entrepreneur, the level of confidence I put in myself, I wanted to put in clothing. So that's how that became to be. And then branching from Roulé into the Yasuke collection, yeah, I really found there's a lot of great ties between going back into history and learning about how we even got to this place. I think it even ties into like fast fashion brands and understanding where the concept of fast fashion came from, you know. And I took a great class, and I'll tie that back into the Slow Factory with regenerative systems with Teju. And if you guys go back and watch that, there's a lot of great ties into like the history of like regenerative systems, like looking at indigenous cultures that were doing practical, sustainable measures even back then, you know, and then kind of like tying that into the context of how I was inspired with my collection, looking through the story, this historical context of an African samurai warrior, tying that history and that knowledge in, and then looking into what else was going on during that time. You know, I think around the Edo period of Japan, that's when sashiko and buro was being introduced, and that was around the same time that Yasuke was out there. So just like finding those connections in between those things and bridging these worlds in, you know, those are different ways that can build in new inspirations, and just tying that all into like understanding your past and how that gets you here to the present and then move forward into the future.
I see that with so many of you designers like designs. It's like a mix of like local and cultural traditions mixed with like a future, whether it's in North Carolina and turning it into like a hub, but drawing on your local communities, Sayo and Gordon and Natasha, you know, everybody's kind of coming in together in that way. It seems also that across all of the designs, and even another audience member asked, is this idea of a hyper local production. So how do you scale up in a business but still remain sustainable? Maybe let me see. Bob, Tia, Raul, if you want to, you know, it's really in your wheelhouse. If you want to jump to that, and then I'd love to hear also from Sayo and Gordon, Mary and Charlotte.
Yeah, I'd love to go ahead and start. I think that's what we started Material Return in early 2019, and it started out very, can we do this? Can we really scale this? And then we actually got an awesome grant to buy a really good piece of German recycled carding equipment, and it just like, it made everything so easy. But the fact that it was that easy, just one capital investment to have a machine specifically made for recycled fibers, and now we're at that point where it's like, hey, all we have to do is double that production to scale and keep scaling. I think the hardest thing is going to be getting the massive brands to kind of latch on to using circular materials. Even, you know, some circular materials right now, especially right now, are going to be a little more expensive because they're not at scale of just a standard cotton or a standard polyester. But yeah, that's the focus, as you find these really values-based brands and support them as they switch to circular, because a lot of brands that are reaching out to us are just committing to, by 2030 we're going to be at least 75% circular, and that's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm like, oh, thank God, because it's all here. We have all the waste we'd ever need. We just need to really start designing a product from the start with end of life in mind, and then also designing systems to put that product back into use after it's already gone through the system. So
I do want to add on to that. I don't know the process as well as Bob. I'm not a designer. You all are just absolutely amazing. But everything that Bob and them are doing, and then going through this design process, I wanted to touch on this question in your previous one, Nicole, about connecting with ancestral design processes, is we were very strategic about the coming together and the bringing together of the Hmong and Guatemalan community. And the idea is that we would celebrate the cultures and not appropriate them. right? So they're at the table, they bring their traditional clothing, but also the funds that Bob had mentioned earlier, some of this funds will go back to help these communities. And that's one way that we give credit to the communities we're working with. And while at the same time, we're educating and bringing awareness about sustainability and using our own textile waste that's here right in our region.
Yeah, I think it's so important to not just be inspired and not even, well, you must center people at the table and give them a voice, but I mean, we live, we live in a capitalistic society. It has to go back to empower these communities. It just has to. That's the only way I think that we can create something that is sustainable and ethical, period.
Yeah, I think it's important to just building, if a circular economy is getting built, I would love to build it with a worker ownership at the forefront. And that's we're a co-op, and every company that's under our umbrella is a co-op. And that's the only way to root wealth locally, and then not just have an extractive economy, just pull everything out that we've built. So that's one important key thing for the circular economy.
Exactly. It invigorates the entire community 100%. Also, I have a question for Delfina. So how do the modular parts of the puffy jacket come apart and then come back together? If you wouldn't mind, if you can show us that.
So was kind of the hardest part for this jacket specifically. So it has a trim of elastic loops, and then it has these ropes with this ending at the end. It's a metallic ending. This was bought, not everything was made out of waste specifically for this jacket, just because it needs to last longer. And some of the materials were not I couldn't find them as a waste, especially when you need tons, especially the elastic, for instance. But basically it takes around 3 hours to put together. So yeah, it's basically just a loop system. I hope that answers your question, Clara, but do let me know if you have more.
Amazing. Well, I have one more question. So the way that you envision this collection being, do you think that people would buy each season it's another add-on to the modular design, or is it at once? Is it, how do you expect a modular rollout?
Well, my dream would be for it to be a store where you could buy the different modules, and in a way empower the consumer to just put them and use their own creativity to put them together. But also if this was an idealistic store, it would also help people that can maybe not put them together, just where it's because of a disability or because they don't have the time, just to put together the different modules. And I think it depends on the resources of, if for instance the store were to be in New York, it would depend on the resource of New York and what are the ways specifically for that area. I think the future fashion design brands that are sustainable will just concentrate on the local resources. So I think that's how I envision it. Does that make?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I love that idea that you would just it makes it so customizable that anybody could kind of assemble it the way that they want. And so then you end up kind of, even though you're creating a modular outfit, which is already so customizable and unique, but then everybody else has the options. So it's just exponential. That's amazing. I love that idea so much. For a wasty pasty, have you had the opportunity to test how long it takes the wasty pasties to break down in the landfill? Which is, a couple people ask that question. So how long does it take for them to degrade?
Hello. That's a great question. It was one of our kind of initial problems we wanted to solve. The hard thing about measuring biodegradability is it's all conditional. So If like I have a compost bin in my garden, and right now nothing's composting because it's New York and it's 30 degrees. So everything's moving slowly. But if it's warmer out, things will compost a lot quicker. The average degradation length is 20 days, but it really is conditional. So we've put some in water and the next day it'll be dissolved. So it really depends on the degradation environment and then these other factors like heat and humidity.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Wedding season is upon us, so I'm gonna need some wasty pasties and then just.
And I will say I've worn them skiing and they did not fall off or degrade while I was sweating and skiing and moving around in them. So
It needs to be like a full submersion.
Yeah.
In water to degrade.
Oh, that's intense. Okay, somebody actually asked it, do you think in the future a biohack can be turned into 3D print material or even melted into a thin thread?
yeah.
Yes, so we didn't share it yet in this presentation, but in some of our other previous presentations and slides, we have been experimenting with extruding the bioplastic into threads and also trying to print with it in different forms. We were specifically looking at mesh because in a lot of our photographs, we're layering the pasties with mesh shirts. And so we wanted to see if we could also use the material to create these shirts. And that's something we're exploring more is 3D printing and extrusion.
And we've used laser cutting as well, but that is subtractive manufacturing. And what we really wanted to look at is additive. So it's a waste-free production process, which is why we looked at pour-to-form molds for the silicone pasties. But the process we worked with, we automized it. So we're using a step motor and Arduino to 3D print basically our hacked version of these mesh tops. And then we've also worked with alginate and making like membrane threads with biochar composite inside as well.
But also, even if we were to do subtractive manufacturing like laser cutting or just like traditional, cutting of patterns, we can remelt the scraps and pour them again. So it's a zero waste process regardless.
Oh my God,
And we're also thinking about energy in that waste as well.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you can also put it in the backyard and then in 20 days it's gone.
And it fertilizes and improves soil quality.
Wow, that's the future. That's great.
Yeah.
Reshmi has a question for Gordon and Sayo and anyone else if they have thoughts. How did you create successful partnerships with other businesses to collect their excess material? Did you have to profit share or were they just happy to not throw them away? And then do you have any advice on partnering with businesses?
For me, I had a really hard time in the beginning finding like a consistent source of these specific materials that I was looking for. But it really helped to like create a pitch deck and to start from there for me, so that you can email it or I don't know, show up to a spot and show it to people. But ultimately for me, I ended up just like having somebody else reach out to me. That really worked out because it was already part of their circular system to collect these materials from their members. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, like asking for it from others, but also like seeking out and reaching out to whether it's like the food industry or like offices and workplaces for these materials that you're looking for.
Yeah, I can second that. I think really when it came to like certain companies or just reaching out, like a pitch deck most of the time works, just showing them your idea of what you would use certain materials for. I did like an event with an advisor a couple months ago, last year actually. And we pretty much submitted like a deck, and most of the time these companies, they want to get rid of these materials. They just don't know where or who to give them to. And one of my cases, they wanted to drop off like I think 17 bags on a truck for a workshop that I was teaching. And it was like, oh no, I only need 3, so fortunately, but they're out there. Just definitely if you're looking for them, they're out there and they're willing to give those materials. You just kind of just have to tell them what it is that you're doing it for, and what type of resources you need. Like Sayo said, it could be food, it could be, it could be agriculture, it could be seeding, it could be, just leftover scraps. And a lot of the times they're willing to give it to you.
Yeah, and I also found that it's really important to like look for these sources locally, because I ended up connecting with random places, but they were like across the states or like far away, and that like doesn't make sense shipping wise. And yeah.
And I'll add too, it's funny when people know that you're in the sustainability space, they're like, oh, you're the sustainable guy. Here you go. So I had a few organizations like nonprofits reach out to me just because they saw the work that I was doing, and consistency is key. So just staying consistent in your field, a lot of people just start drawing to you. You find out, once again, that community, you just build it out.
Totally. Bob, I think you were going to also say something, jump in.
Yeah. I think Gordon and I, we spoke on a call like early on, and I was like, if you need anything, we've got it all. But that's the same thing. It's like, we never, like, I always want to be the last step in the process to grind, put all this like energy into making the new yarn out of it. So like we keep tons of different textiles on site and usually give them away to the community. We have yarns, fabrics, everything you can think of. So I hope one day we could have like a wholesale storefront just for like discontinued fabrics and things, because there's just massive amounts out there.
So I'll just tack on to that, because Bob doesn't like to brag on himself, so I will brag on him. We work very closely with our educational institutions here as well. So K through 12 community college, private schools and charter schools, but we have this wonderful relationship with the art teachers and the STEM teachers, and they basically can come into Bob's plant, and it's almost like a shopping trip. They can get materials for, robotics projects and sewing projects. And so this has really helped the teachers themselves get material, acquire material, and take it back and use it and create something with the students. So that's just an amazing thing that Bob and them are doing just on the side.
I love that. So many, so many of you all are like, just ask. People are happy to give. Like I love that. It seems like a lot of companies really are just kind of like, we were just going to toss it anyway. Here, take it. And it's almost like, like a feel good thing where they're able to like discard these things and like give it a new life. And it's just, how often probably do they have people coming in being like, hey, can I have your rice bags? And they're like, okay, yeah, take them, So I just love that idea of also kind of focusing on what you have within your community, and, even having something that's like shareable, like, it benefits you and it benefits them to kind of pass it along. I'm going to finish off this beautiful open EDU with one more question. So, Janet asks to any of the designer, what is or was your biggest obstacle? And I think maybe just within the design process or sourcing, however you kind of want to pick it, wherever you feel that it is, would love to. And also let's put a, positive spin, and then how do you overcome that?
I'll go quickly. I think mine is definitely always time. I find it, really hard to try and like work full time and like make enough money to live, and then also really wanting to do like these kind of creative projects. But this, if you just are really passionate about it and but they're not making you any money, it can be really difficult. So yeah, trying to invest enough time into these things. And I suppose a way to overcome that now is like, for me, because of COVID and things like that, like I've decided that I am not going to kind of go back to work like full time. I'm just going to kind of sustain my lifestyle, work enough so that I can like pay my bills and, cover all the kind of main things, but leave enough time so that I can still do the